Hi golfers, Nick here for Untitled Golf. It's Friday, so welcome to another lesson on golf tips. This week on Golf Tips, we're going to discuss the hip movement in the golf swing. So if this is something you struggle with or want to find a little bit more about, then this is a great video for you. So the hip movement is probably one of the most talked about movements, or one of the key movements in the golf swing. We all know the comment, it's all in the hips. Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about how the hips move. We're going to talk about this in detail. All you're really going to need for this video is an alignment stick, and I'm going to share with you guys how you can measure kind of how you move your hips. I'm going to share with you how I move my hips, and the key things you need to look for to help you move better in the golf swing. The hip movement's key for power, it's key for controlling where the club hits the ground, and it's quite key for controlling the curve of the ball. All key fundamentals to play good golf. First up guys, I'm just going to hit my standard sort of 7-iron. Now I know when I hit my normal golf shot and turn my hips in the correct way, I'm going to swing around 90 miles an hour. I'm going to hit around 4 or 5 degrees downwards and swing around 4 degrees into out. So you can see on the screen there, pretty straight shot. Generally the shot's generally a push draw. You can see it pitch around 160. And on the data there, 93 miles an hour, swing 3 degrees inside out, 5 degrees downwards, pretty straight shots. That's a pretty typical golf shot for me. Now what we're going to do is discuss how I move the hips and how I create power, how I swing on that angle, and also control when my club hits the ground. For this video, golfers, all you're going to need is an alignment stick and some belt loops. That will help as well. So I'm just going to put these through my belt loops here. Through the course of this video, I'm going to be discussing kind of what things you need to look for if you video your swing, if you're looking in a mirror or on the camera. I'm going to be explaining what I do in my swing. Like I said there, the key is to move our body weight towards the target in the right way. The key is to rotate. How much do we do that and at what point? And also, how do we create power? So through the video here, I'm going to be bringing up my swing and we're going to be looking at it from both viewpoints. So first of all, let's discuss the setup position. So as I set up to the golf ball here, you'll notice that the left hip is slightly higher than the right hip. So it's not perfectly level, my hips. There's a couple of degrees of tilt to them. And then you're going to see the difference in a second in the backswing. And then from the side view, you can see my hips are pretty much square to my target line. So I'm aiming my hips pretty straight, and you'll see how my belt buckle is forward. So you can see from my belt here, I'm leaning forward. So I'm leaning forward, I have a slight tilt to my left. So that's kind of what you're looking for at setup position. Now we're going to take a look at the movement of the hips as we go into the backswing. Right from the off, guys, and this is sort of quite misunderstood, I think, is how much my hips rotate. Take a look at my knees, right? Look and see the gap in my knees, how much I turn my hips. Now, by the time I get up to roughly when my left arm is parallel to the ground here, my right leg is almost dead straight. And now you have to be careful with this. I'm not saying you need to lock your leg to help you self-turn, but certainly some degree of straightening does help as you go back. I'm not trying to lock my leg here, and I think this is quite important. I'm just trying to allow it to straighten to some degree. From the front view, you'll see how the stick turns on a bit of an angle. My head stays pretty stable, and my hips certainly don't sway. So I'm going to put that line on the screen so you can see. There's no sort of sway back and forth in my hips. Now, by the time I get up to the top, by the time I reach the top of the backswing, we're talking about the point when I've turned probably the most, or my club's traveled the furthest in the backswing. If you actually look at my knee, it's actually starting to regain some flexion. And this is key. This is probably one of the most key parts to the hip movement, especially as you start down. So you probably figured by now that I'm changing my knee flex, right? That's helping me turn, and it's helping me turn my hips on an angle as well, which is quite important. We also turn our shoulders on an angle. Every golfer does tilt their shoulders and they tilt their hips. So by the time I get to the top there, my right knee starts to regain some flexion even before I even start my downswing or start the club coming back down. Some people refer to this as kind of the transition. What do you feel in transition? And certainly there's a combination of things happening. It's not just one thing. Now, in my experience, I would say that the golfers that I teach, the majority of them do turn as they start back down, but they don't move their hips far enough forward towards the target. When you take a look at the best golfers, they all move their hips from setup to impact about 4 inches forward. The high handicap golfers that I teach, they move their hips generally backwards as they start down, or certainly they don't move it far enough forward from setup to impact. And the more you just turn your body, the more your swing is going to move from outside to in. So it does depend on the individual and what you want to try and feel in your golf swing. But generally, the slicers, they turn without moving their hips forward, whereas the drawers or the overdrawers of the golf ball or pushers out to the right, they tend to slide more than they turn. So if we take a look at my swing here, you'll see that from the top of the swing, my right leg has already started to regain some flexion as I start to turn. So this is key. As I start to bend my right knee, I'm also turning my hips and pushing my hips here to the left as I start down. Okay, so there's a combination of things. I'm changing my knee flex, pushing my weight to the left and turning. By the time we get down to roughly where the left arm is parallel to the ground, we call this P5, and it's probably just past this point for me, but my hips start to get back to where they were at setup. So my setup, my hips were square to the target. In the backswing, my hips turn to about 45 degrees, and by the time I get back to this point, P5, my hips are almost back to zero, and my knee flex is pretty much back to where it was at setup as well. So you can see that very quick kind of rotation or opening of the hips. But if you take a look from the front view, you see how my hips are moved 2 or 3 inches forward at the same time. So this is key. We have to learn here to move your hips forward and rotate as you start down. Now by the time we get down to position 6 here, where the shaft is parallel, you'll start to see how the hips are starting to open up. Again, my hips are forward. My head's pretty stable at this point, but my hips are forward and turning. So guys, it's basically a combination of things. I'm moving my hips forward and turning as I start down that transition. By the time I get to the impact position, my hips are open, maybe 20, 25 degrees, and my hips are pushed forward about 3 or 4 degrees from where they started as I hit into the golf ball. My head stayed pretty stable. This creates a kind of a side tilt to my shoulders. And then from here, I'm going to keep pushing forward. You can see my right foot comes up, my hips keep pushing forward, and I rotate my hips to just past 90 degrees by the time I finish. And you can see there my shoulders have turned a little bit more. And all my weight by this point is towards the target. So by this point, I've probably moved about 6 or 7 inches forward with my hips and rotated at the same time. So these movements happen very quickly, but the key is, guys, you have to learn how to turn, rotate, and tilt the hips. Okay, in the backswing, my hips are tilted to the left. By the time I hit the golf ball, my hips are starting to tilt to the right. And then in the finish, there will be very slight tilt to the right with my hips and my shoulders, very slight, not too much, just a few degrees. So there's some tilting, there's a lot of turning, and there's also a lot of swaying towards the target. So I didn't mention there once that we have to sway away from the target. I was really explaining how we turn to stay centered, and then from there, how we start to turn and move forward. And if you do this right amount or a similar amount to what I do there, you will be able to swing the club on plane or close to plane. You'll be able to create speed, because that's important as well. And you'll be able to hit the ground in the correct spot. So it does depend on the individual, like how much they need to feel this. Like I said, generally, in my experience, the higher handicappers tend to turn more than they sway. And generally, the better golfers tend to sway more than they turn. Now, this is not always the case. This is not a written rule, but that's just generally what happens. So golfers, hopefully that's given you guys a little bit of insight there into the hip movement and a way that you can measure it using these key checkpoints. So thanks for watching, golfers. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you've got any questions on that, post them on the box below. And in the meantime, guys, make sure you stay on the grid, and I'll see you again next week for another video.